We should not, largely because there's no strategy. And throwing troops into what is now a 12-year-old civil war without a strategy makes no sense for us, frankly. The Afghan police and the Afghan army are losing men at a very high rate. They have not been able to work out a strategy. They have not been able to deal with corruption. Whatever we contribute will make no difference, Rudyard. And if I were our Prime Minister or our Foreign Minister or Defense Minister, I would say, what's the strategy?
Peter, let's have your reply.
Well, I respectfully disagree, although I think the conditions that Janice has laid out are correct, that you need to have a strategy and you need to know what it is we're being asked to do. And as I understand it, no official ask has come. Right. However, we have invested heavily in blood and treasure. Janice is correct. There is no question that Canada has a vested interest, along with our NATO allies, in seeing that Afghanistan not destabilize further. Now, it's an extreme. It's trite to say how complex that country is and the mission itself, the amount of time and effort that has gone in. But let's not forget Canada's experience there. Canada's mission would not simply be sending troops. This is always going to be a multifaceted effort to build governance, which is absolutely critical and perhaps the biggest failing in the Afghan mission. We need to continue to support their security forces. And Canada, I would argue, was one of the best at doing that. The operational mentoring liaison teams, the effort to build capacity within the Afghan army and police were greatly assisted by Canada's effort there. And so depending on what we were being asked to do, there is certainly the capacity within the Canadian forces. Now, there's talk of a mission to the Baltic states. There's still talk of where we might wind up in Africa. I would suggest in terms of the stabilization and what that means for Afghanistan and what it means for the broader world, Canada has a lot to offer, and we could make a modest contribution there in terms of both the diplomatic, capacity building, and security.
Janice, you know, in any negotiation, you want your next best alternative. So if you're not sending troops, if you're effectively allowing this state to collapse, what is the alternative other than sending troops?
There's a really bad story here, unfortunately, and you know, I agree with the minister that we were among the very best, but we didn't really succeed in building governance. We have a president that was supported by the international community, Ashraf Ghani, one of the best, who's struggling in his own country to consolidate his authority. Governance is no stronger today. Development assistance has not really succeeded, in part for reasons that Peter just talked about. You can't do it without security. So if we look for our next best police forces, where again we have been heavy contributors, international and training police, it's actually the police forces that are taking it on the chin, Rudyard, here, and collapsing, not only in southern Afghanistan, which is where we fought in Kandahar, but in the north, in the northeast.
100 a day.
100 a day. And you replace them, they're badly trained. This is a story that's been going on for a long
but Janice,
time.
Just to push you on the point, though, if you don't send troops, if you don't double down, do you just let it go back to Afghanistan of 2000, which created 9/11? I mean, that doesn't seem like a very attractive outcome.
It isn't, and you're right that what we would see here, we're standing before a brutal civil war again in Afghanistan, which is what the coalition came in to stop. It's not clear that the Taliban would create the conditions this time around for ISIS, number one. Secondly, ISIS now has many theaters of operation. It didn't before 9/11. It does now. It's actually spread. So why we would choose this theater over any other is not clear. And thirdly, I think we have to have some measure of operational success here. And that's why I come back. What's the strategy? What's the goal?
Okay, well, let's come to Peter on that because you've got a lot of experience. I mean, what is the strategy? I mean, doubling the troops from 8,000 to, I don't know, 16,000, what does that really do, Peter? You know how big the commitment was. We had 100,000 troops in that country, and arguably, we were just holding the line.
We were, but we did hold the line, and we stopped, I would suggest, any threat of another attack, going back to your point, coming from Afghanistan. to say the least, they have very unhelpful neighbors. The Iranians, even Pakistan, the federally administered tribal areas, as Janice said, where we spent most of our time in Kandahar province was the spiritual homeland of the Taliban. There are also elements now of ISIS that are showing up in the country as well. Russia did their best to destabilize. There's all kinds of desperate, clannish type elements to Afghan society that even after years of being there, we had a difficult time sorting through. We have great experience at the top in the Canadian Armed Forces and throughout the ranks, including reservists who served there. General John Vance was there twice, knows that country, knows the mission well. Now, I come back to Janice's point, what would Canada be asked to do?
Right.
Training, but training in an effective frontline way, as we're doing, frankly, in parts of Syria, as we're doing currently, to try to bring about some sense of stability in that desperate region. Canada has a lot to offer. I would suggest that that would be a far bigger contribution than going to the Baltics or anywhere else for that matter, if in fact we're asked to do so. If H.R. McMaster or if James Mattis reach out to their counterparts in Canada, I think we at least owe them a hearing. We owe our NATO colleagues and allies in Brussels that discussion. And I would suggest, and finally, Canada was very effective at what we did, in spite of Janice's correct assessment that this was a very difficult mission. The building of schools, the fact that we have more women now attending schools and participating in their system than at any point in the last decade or more, those are benchmarks that Canada has a place of pride in having achieved. But it's all backsliding. There's no question that the problem rests in their governance, and so it would have to be, again, a multifaceted approach.
Yeah. Janice, just 10 seconds left. Does Canada sign on? Do you think it's likely? Or
No.
No?
I don't think it's likely, and I think we've come out of that experience, which was pretty tough on the forces, as the minister would know, with a clear determination that without a defined mission, without credible partners on the ground and in Kabul, we can't do this again.